With this, today, we have decided that this session would be going to happen on a 17th century emperor called Aurangzeb. And why this session is important, as we know that the current regime, which is there, and their legislatures who are there in the parliament, they are continuously debating in on one platform or another on the distortion of history. So while I say distortion of history, they are trying. They are not even they are not actually erasing. They are trying to rewrite the history, right? So they are not denying that there was a Mughal emperor called Aurangzeb. They recognize the existence of Aurangzeb, but in some distorted manner. Like very recently, in a working session in last, I think, monsoon session, around that, not on the record, but in some interview, Rajnath Singh has said that Aurangzeb was a very cruel and very he has used some word with the cruel. He was very cruel and very brutal, kind of emperor who was always there to demolish the temples and all these kind of institutions. So while I was discussing with Azhar, who is our today's speaker, so he has shared very interesting documents with me where Aurangzeb has produced farmans, and in that it is written. Actually, he has given money for the restoration of temples in Banaras and all these places. So on this note, we thought that there should be a session on a history. Basically how. So in academics, there are various approaches to understand the politics of historiography. So we decided to start with this session from a point where this regime is starting their politics. So I will not say much on this. So with this, I would like to. So our today's speaker is Dr. Azhar Mallick. He has recently completed his PhD from Department of History and Culture in Jamia, and his PhD is itself on Aurangzeb. So basically, his interest lies. What he told me, that his interest lie at the intersection of Mughal political history, vernacular historiography, Indo-Persian court culture, Indo-European interaction, and historical discourses in colonial and post-colonial South Asia. So, with this note, I would like to invite Dr. Azhar Malik.
Thank you, Alphonse, for the generous introduction and giving me this opportunity. It is an honor to address such an esteemed audience of intellectuals and students. Okay, so the topic of today's discussion is Aurangzeb after 3 centuries: power, politics of historiography, and public imaginations. Okay, before starting this topic, let me give you a brief introduction biography of Aurangzeb. So Aurangzeb was the sixth Mughal emperor and the fifth son of Shah Jahan. At the age of 18, he was appointed governor of Deccan, a region that has been one of the most politically volatile and militarily contested frontiers of the Mughal Empire. He remained in the Deccan for nearly 22 years. In 1685, following the War of Succession, he ascended the throne and went on to rule the Indian subcontinent for the almost for 50 okay for 50 almost 50 years. There is little doubt that under his reign, the Mughal Empire reached the zenith of its territorial expansion when Aurangzeb died in 1707. After a reign of nearly as long as Akbar, he left behind an empire that stretched farther than it had ever before. His period of rule is best characterized by relentless military campaigns, an aspect he consciously emphasized by adopting the title Aramgir, meaning the conqueror of the world. Through this title, he sought to inscribe himself into history as a formidable military commander, invoking the legacy of his ancestor Timur. Okay. Nearly 3 centuries has passed since his death, yet Aurangzeb has remained strikingly present in contemporary public life, appearing in court, election rallies, legal disputes, debates, social media controversies, and movies. He has become one of the most controversial figures in Indian history, not merely because of what he did during his lifetime, but because of the intensive politicization of his memory. Historical image of Aurangzeb that has come down to us is not derived solely from the evidence. Rather, it represents a complex mixture of memory, interpretation, and reinterpretation, shaped, reshaped, and contested ever since his death. The centuries following his reign has been decisively in constructing his public image, often reflecting the anxieties, aspiration, and ideological concerns of later society. So it was the Britisher that shaped initially had major impact in shaping the current image of Aurangzeb. And Britisher was the first to systematically interpret and shape Indian historiography. They constructed the medieval period, spanning roughly 8th century, as an era marked by oppressive Muslim rule. Within this framework, Aurangzeb emerged as a central figure because he fit perfectly into the colonial stereotype of Muslim monarch. Imagine as one who ruled with Quran in one hand and the sword in the other. This idea was not entirely new. During the Enlightenment, European thinkers had already popularized similar tropes about the Ottoman Sultan, portraying them as fanatical rulers driven by religious zeals. And the British later extended this conceptual template to Aurangzeb. As a consequence, his individual agency as a political actor was largely erased, and nearly all of his policies were interpreted exclusively through the lens of religious motivations. A colonial scholar, W.H. Sleeman, famously claimed that Aurangzeb carried the Quran everywhere under his arm, and a dramatic exaggeration intended to reinforce the image of a rigid orthodox ruler. Another colonial scholar, Kennedy, went so far as to call Aurangzeb a Mohammedan missionary, implying that his primary objective as emperor was the conversion of Hindustan to Islam. Even his military engagement with the Portuguese in Goa and Chittagong were interpreted as being motivated by hostility toward Christianity rather than geopolitical or strategic imperatives. Allama Shibli has sharply observed about the reductive nature of colonial historiography that उन्हें ले दे के सारी दास्तान में याद है इतना कि औरंगजेब हिंदू कुश था, जालिम था, सितमगर था. That in the end, the only thing they remember from the entire historical narrative that Aurangzeb was a Hindu killer, a tyrant, and oppressor. One of the earliest and most influential colonial scholars was Robert Orme. It was Robert Orme who translated the entire Deccan campaign of Aurangzeb as being directed primarily against Shivaji and the Marathas. He further assumed that because the Marathas and the Rajputs share the same faith, they jointly resisted the Mughal Empire. Later colonial scholars made the rise of Shivaji the central defining feature of Aurangzeb's reign, arguing that Shivaji's emergence was largely the outcome of Aurangzeb's own policy. According to them, this development became a major source of anxiety for Aurangzeb, compelling him to divert all his energies toward defeating Shivaji. However, contemporary sources suggest a markedly different scenario. The first direct confrontation between Aurangzeb and Shivaji occurred in 1664, when Shivaji launched a surprise attack on the port city of Surat and plundered it. At that time, Aurangzeb was on his way to Kashmir. Although the incident certainly disturbed him, as it should have, it was not serious enough to force him to abandon his journey and personally march against Shivaji. Instead, he dispatched his general Jai Singh to deal with the situation. Aurangzeb himself marched toward the Deccan in 1681, nearly a year after Shivaji's death. In the intervening period, he sent various generals and his own sons to contain Shivaji, achieving mixed results. This suggests that Aurangzeb did not consider Shivaji a threat significant enough to require his own direct presence. Even when he finally marched to Deccan in 1681, Aurangzeb strategically used the pretext of pursuing Prince Akbar after the latter's involvement in the failed Rathore rebellion to justify an extended campaign that targeted the Bahmani successor state of Bijapur and Golconda. In 1681, therefore, his military Military initiative was not directed against the Marathas. For the next 7 years, Aurangzeb fought largely against Bijapur and Golconda until their eventual fall. Sambhaji Shivaji's son was captured only accidentally by a Faujdar 2 years later. The Mughal-Maratha conflict intensified dramatically after the execution of Sambhaji, making a new phase of hostility and okay. Some colonial scholars have argued that Aurangzeb pursued Shivaji so relentlessly only because Shivaji has allegedly looted a ship carrying Muslim pilgrims on their way to the Hajj. However, the historical evidence complicates this assumption. In reality, Portuguese and the European pirates posed a far greater and more persistent threat to Indian ships traveling for the Hajj. Portuguese frequently plundered vessels and often forced the merchant to purchase cartage passes to ensure safe passage. Yet Aurangzeb never launched a military campaign against the Portuguese on this account. The only time he marched against the Europeans, it was in 1695 when English pirates attacked and looted the Mughal royal ship Ganj-e-Sawai. Aurangzeb responded with great severity. He ordered strong punitive measures against the British East India Company, temporarily shutting down their factories and restricting their trade across the Mughal territory. Nevertheless, even this reaction was driven primarily by the affront to imperial prestige and the violation of Mughal sovereignty, not by concern related to the Hajj. From the early 19th century, Aurangzeb was frequently portrayed by colonial scholars as a religious zealot who was obsessed with imposing Islam on his subjects. He was presented as a tyrant and iconoclast who was involved in destroying everything that belonged to the people of other faiths, a ruler who persecuted and oppressed Hindus, desecrated their holy places, and was more interested in enforcing his own religious belief. 50 years of his rule was presented as the age of wrath for the non-Muslims of India. His reign was presented as a period of relentless struggle with the Marathas or his Hindu subjects. Distinct events such as Shivaji's struggle, the Rathore rebellion, and the Satrami uprising were presented as the combined resistance of the Hindu community against his policies. On certain occasions, facts were manipulated in order to portray an exaggerated representation of his policies. Aurangzeb has been consistently characterized using derogatory terms such as cruel, tyrant, bloodthirsty, bigot, oppressor, impostor, usurper, intolerant, cunning, fanatic, and hypocrite, all of which indicate highly unfavorable human traits. In this phase, a greater focus was placed on his crimes than his abilities. Colonial scholars frequently framed Aurangzeb through a series of binaries. He was contrasted with Akbar and Darashikoh, who were portrayed as embodiment of secularism and inclusivism. While Aurangzeb was cast as the representative of Islamic orthodoxy, he was also opposed with Shivaji, who was depicted as a champion of local Hindu resistance against what colonial scholars characterized as the oppressive and intrusive Islamic rule of Aurangzeb. Similarly, Aurangzeb was set against Shah Jahan, who was celebrated for artistic and cultural splendor, whereas Aurangzeb was portrayed as a symbol of decline. Across these binaries, Aurangzeb was inevitably emerged as the bad figure, while anyone positioned against him was elevated as a symbol of virtue, progress, or resistance. Moreover, the criteria of binary classification lacked coherence and uniformity. They shifted depending on the narrative of a colonial scholar sought to advance. In reality, the Akbar-Aurangzeb binary itself was a colonial construction. Aurangzeb never presented himself as an antithesis of Akbar, nor do his letter or documents indicate that. His letter certainly contains critiques and resentment directed at Shah Jahan, but there is no evidence of any antagonism toward Akbar. Even one of the dearest sons to him was named Akbar. Alexander Todd was among the earliest scholars to sharply contrast Aurangzeb with Akbar. This interpretive framework was subsequently adopted by later colonial writers, eventually becoming a dominant and uncritically repeated trope in Aurangzeb's biographical literature. Another method that was employed by colonial scholars was the double standard of scrutiny. Colonial scholars had exceptionally stringent, very strict standard applied when assessing Aurangzeb's action and legacy. Aurangzeb was subjected to close scrutiny and criticism for even minor errors, whereas the actions of other leaders, binaries, were disregarded or dismissed. Elphinstone, for instance, Elphinstone has commented on Shivaji's action, stating that throughout his entire period, despite using death and torture as means to extract confession regarding hidden treasures, Shivaji never engaged in any unnecessary act of cruelty. He suggests that notwithstanding these actions, Shivaji was never individually accountable for any instances of unwarranted brutality. Grant Duff portrayed Shivaji as a staunch defender of his religious beliefs. And Aurangzeb was criticized for the same reason, that is, asserting and practicing his own religion. Similarly, Todd has also stated that both Jahangir and Shah Jahan received Rajput supports because they were descended from Rajputs. However, Aurangzeb's lineage of pure Tatar origin failed to generate any sentiment of sympathy from the Rajput. But at another place, he claims that the entire Rajput race was sympathetic to Dara's cause, though both Aurangzeb and Dara were born to the same parents. So, if based on the Todd's argument, if they were not supporting Aurangzeb because of his Tatar religion, they should not never had supported Dara. But he accept that they supported Rajput supported Dara. So they should have no issue with his Tatar origin. Okay. And then the colonial interpretive framework surrounding Aurangzeb did not remain confined to British writers. It gradually passed on to Indian intellectual circles as well. In the early phase, a number of Indian scholars working under the intellectual influence of colonial officials such as Raja Shiv Prasad, Samuddin, Maulvi Karimuddin adopted this colonial argument and helped disseminate them among Indian readers. In addition to this, as Lake Denault has demonstrated, Indian newspaper and literature often invoked Aurangzeb as a political trope to avoid colonial censorship. For instance, the Hindi Pradeep used the figure of Aurangzeb to offer indirect criticism of British policies when direct criticism was prohibited. A similar pattern can be seen in the nationalist mobilization led by Bal Gangadhar Tilak when Tilak initiated the Shivaji festival in 1895. He consciously employed the narrative of Shivaji's struggle against Aurangzeb to evoke anti-colonial sentiment among the masses. Interestingly, the British authorities did not object to this indirect allusion. However, when Tilak later endorsed direct resistance against the British rule, he was arrested on charges of sedition. This interpretation of Aurangzeb had little to do with historical accuracy. Rather, they were crafted to serve specific political and ideological purposes at particular historical moments. Nevertheless, such interpretation became deeply embedded in the social imagination. Over time, Indian society found itself divided into two broad intellectual groups. One group accepted the colonial narrative it's entirely regarded Aurangzeb as a religious fanatic and a barbaric ruler. Their argument continued to rest on these colonial assumptions. Aurangzeb's name came to be used as a tool for communal polarization, encouraging hostility towards most Muslims and generating fears of Muslim political leadership. The other group of Indians sought to challenge the colonial representation of.
And read slowly because we are not getting proper.
Okay. The other group of Indians sought to challenge the colonial representation of Aurangzeb. Their initial critiques were grounded in the recent historical analysis. However, over time, some section of this group moved towards the opposite extreme, transforming Aurangzeb into a saint-like figure, even employing honorifics such as Rahmatullah Alayh after his name. Okay, so therefore there is a compelling need to reconsider the character and the reign of Aurangzeb in their entirety. Aurangzeb was first and foremost a ruler subject to the same political composition and administrative challenges and imperial ambitions that shaped the conduct of the most early modest opponents. While it is true that he was personally more pious and observant than many of his Mughal predecessors and even copied 3 to 4 manuscripts of the Quran in his own hand, this personal religiosity did not prevent him from implementing policies that served political necessity. His reign reflects a complex interplay between pragmatic governance and selective deployment of religious authority. One of the most frequently cited piece of evidence used to portray Aurangzeb as an embodiment of religious zeal is his patronage of the Fatwa-e-Alamgiri, a comprehensive compendium of Hanafi law. However, his actual practice often diverged from the rulings prescribed in this text. A particularly revealing example pertains to the collection of jizya. The Fatawa Alamgiri explicitly state that jizya is to be collected from Ahle Kitab, that is Jews and Christians. Yet we possess Farman issued by Aurangzeb in which he granted exemption to Christian communities, and the surviving records suggest that he never imposed jizya on Christians in a systematic manner. Not a single European traveler records paying it. This inconsistency becomes even more pronounced when we recall that the Fatwa contains no mention of the Indian religious groups such as Hindus, Jains, or Buddhists under the category of Ahl Kitab. Nevertheless, Aurangzeb imposed jizya upon Hindus in 1679, a decision that cannot be supported by legal prescription of the Fatwa. The justification for this policy must therefore be sought in political rather than religious motivations. Similarly, the Fatawa Alamgiri contains explicit instruction that structure predating Islam should not be demolished. Yet Aurangzeb ordered the destruction of certain temples within his dominion. Whatever the reason behind these actions, they cannot be attributed straightforwardly to Islamic injunctions. They reflect statecraft rather than doctrinal obligation. Changes of mass conversion have also been leveled against him by colonial scholar S.R. Sarma collected approximately 125 cases of conversion during Aurangzeb's reign, yet he concluded that these instances were scattered and diverse, with no indication of a systematic state policy promoting forced conversion. There was, in other words, no program of mass Islamization under Aurangzeb. In conclusion, Aurangzeb must be understood primarily as a ruler shaped by the political, administrative, and military realities of his time. He was neither a saint nor a villain, but an early modern sovereign who acted in ways he believed were necessary for the preservation and expansion of his empire. His reign, like that of any other monarch, comprised action that can be interpreted as both beneficial and detrimental. These actions should not be attributed to him alone within the historical context in which he operated. No community or good group should be held collectively responsible for his decision, nor should his policies be invoked to justify contemporary political or communal agendas. Instead, he should be examined through a critical or historical grounded lens that moves beyond inherited biases and simplistic moral binaries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azhar bhai, for this very wonderful paper presentation. Now, I would like to open the floor for Q&A. And before opening the floor, I mean, if audience allows me, then I have a couple of questions in my mind when I was listening to your presentation. Okay. The first thing, when you were discussing the relation between Aurangzeb and Dara Shikoh. So, what are the? I mean, this just I'm not a historian, so just a thought. So, what are the what were the differences in their administrative policies on the basis of which we call it as a colonial division of their administrative policies, and which leads to the second question, where you said that Aurangzeb, I mean, when you compare with the Akbar,
Okay.
so and where you rightly said that it was a colonial a binary which has been created. So why this boundary has been created. I mean, so since I'm not a historian, if I look it through the politics of historiography, especially the political historiography, and in an academic sense, when you say it's a colonial construction of boundary between Akbar and
Aurangzeb.
Aurangzeb.
Okay.
So why it was there? Can, like, is it something related to the boundary of good Muslim or bad Muslim, or to divide the communities, which was there at that time. So I mean, like, I had these initial two questions in my thought, which after listening to you. So yeah, with this, I mean, you can address with the questions, others question also.
Whether
I think Zafar bhai.
This. So I mean, for a layman like me, so why Aurangzeb is much in debate now? The one thing. I mean, before you address the Alpha's question, I think I need to know that why Aurangzeb is much debated, and why we want to know. We should know Aurangzeb, and why it is important among these Mughal rulers, and then before that Ghulaman was there, right? So because other rulers are less debated or less talked about, so I need to understand this. Thank you.
okay, so whether I answer each question or okay. So first you asked about Dara and difference between the policies and of Dara and Aurangzeb. So it has been basically argued much. I think believe it is because of interpretations. Many scholars believe that Dara would be more secular, more Akbar-like when he become Aurangzeb, or when he become a ruler, and but what Aurangzeb did is very different from Dara. He was like, it is believed that Aurangzeb was very religiously motivated, and his policies were based on religious values. So it is on this basis many people argued that Dara would be very Akbar. He would have followed Akbar. But apart from that, there is another group of scholars who believe that if Dara would be in place of Aurangzeb, he would have done the same thing. Like he would have murdered his brother if Aurangzeb had not done so. And he would have acted like against rebels the way Aurangzeb have acted against all the rebels and groups. Surely anyone would be a ruler in place of Aurangzeb, he would have done so, because no ruler likes rebellion against him in power and losing his throne. So that's first part, and the second part was Akbar and Aurangzeb's binary. Actually, the binary, I don't think it was very deliberate. Initially, it was very indirectly, very not deliberate. But later on, it became a deliberate after 1857 when European power, when European colonial scholars started to appropriate Akbar as their identical ruler. They asserted that they are here to revive the rule of Akbar and impose a rule like Akbar, the way Akbar had ruled. So in this binary, they place themselves against Aurangzeb. So like we are against we are here to end the rule of Aurangzeb and the values on which Aurangzeb had ruled. We are here to end that, and we will rule based on the values on which Akbar had ruled. So it is.
When we have a Farmans that where Dara ordered for the destruction of the newly constructed temples, and that's why he is considered as a secular movement.
Actually, apart another reason is that there was a group of colonial scholars, especially missionary scholars. They were very fond of Dara. They believed that Dara would have become Christian if he had survived. So they favor Dara rather than against the Aurangzeb in their narratives. Like when there is a scholar, W.S. Lehman, he has argument that the moment Dara was defeated in Battle of Samugad, the there was the chances of Christianity became dominant religion was lost. So this kind of belief that the missionary scholars had. And then the third question was by Zafar about the relevance of Aurangzeb. Actually, it is. I think it is not very relevant for us. The topic of Aurangzeb is imposed on Muslims. It was not the Muslim who had chosen Aurangzeb as their hero. But it was the period of the last 2 centuries in which Aurangzeb has been targeted not for his rule, but because of his Muslim identity, or in order to target the Muslim community, they have used the name of Aurangzeb as a symbol to target the Muslim community. So the when Muslim scholars wrote about the response or defended Aurangzeb, they never tried to defend Aurangzeb. Most of the time they don't even take into consider primary sources, what primary sources were saying. They largely focus about what the contemporary politics were going, and on the basis of that they gave responses. And the Muslim community also used Aurangzeb the same way it was used by the others to target Muslim community. So somehow we become bounded to respond, to defend Aurangzeb. And that's how. Otherwise, there are a lot of many rulers, good rulers, who can be brought into mainstream, like Sher Shah. And then we have Ghayasuddin Khalji. Then we have Hussain Shah. Then we have Adil Shah II. Kuli Qutub Shah. There are a lot of rulers that should be brought into mainstream, and they have a lot. They are not very controversial as Aurangzeb. So, okay.
Rahul.
So I have 3 interventions to make. One is to the Alfaz Bhai's comment when he was saying that the whatever right now we are witnessing is just not only the erasing of history but rewriting the history.
Okay.
But my concern is that the problem is erasing itself, not the rewriting only. Because history में तो interpretations होता ही है. तो rewriting the history is not the only problem. क्योंकि वो तो होता रहेगा with the passing time. The other 2 interventions are in the form of a question. The first one is with regard to the idea of strict binaries. So I consider it as a very major problem, and especially when we talk about the history writing itself. So on one hand, I'll give you an example. On one hand, when we talk about Aurangzeb, we say that Aurangzeb has destructed and demolished the temples, and on the other hand, we argue and we say that he has issued the farmans also, favoring the some temples. But I think as you all also have presented in your presentation that we cannot see the one aspect of a personality, we have to consider and we have to see comprehensively.
Yeah.
So आंसर ये नहीं है कि अगर कोई कह रहा है कि डिस्ट्रक्शन किया तो आंसर ये नहीं कि उसने फरमान भी इशू किया, क्योंकि अगर हम सिर्फ यह भी कहेंगे कि उसने फरमान इशू किया तो मुझे लगता है कि वो भी एक फुल पिक्चर नहीं होगी.
ठीक है. हाँ.
क्वेश्चन ये है कि मैं क्वेश्चन पे आ रहा हूँ. बाइनरीज 2 लेवल्स पे हम देखते हैं. वन इज एट द लेवल ऑफ विद इन द औरंगजेब. हम कहते हैं कि औरंगजेब अच्छा था या खराब था. एक तो ये बाइनरी है. दूसरा बाइनरी हम देखते हैं कि व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द औरंगजेब एंड कंपेयर इट विद अदर रूलर्स, फॉर एग्जांपल बी इट औरंगजेब एंड अकबर एंड औरंगजेब एंड दारा शिको. द क्वेश्चन इज, कैन यू टेल अस अबाउट these binaries? From where did these binaries come from? Whose thought, whose result is this binary? ये बाइनरी किस विचार से आया है? क्या ये बाइनरी यहाँ की ट्रेडिशंस से हम देखते हैं या ये जैसे कि आपने बोला, एज यू हैव स्टेटेड दैट इट्स अ कॉलोनियल कंस्ट्रक्ट,
रिगार्डिंग अकबर एंड औरंगजेब. ओके.
एंड कॉलोनियल हिस्टोरियोग्राफी का पोर्ट्रेयल, जैसे कि आपने बताया कि उन्होंने कहा कि ये ऐसा उन्होंने किया, बट एक मुझे एक कमेंट याद आ रहा है इरफान हबीब का. इरफान हबीब से पूछा गया कि औरंगजेब के रिगार्डिंग आप क्या बोलते हैं, तो उन्होंने कहा कि औरंगजेब इज़ नॉट एवरीवन्स कप ऑफ टी एंड स्पेशली नॉट माइन. So if the portrayal of Aurangzeb being a bad ruler is the result of a colonial historiography and the colonial construct, तो फिर later historians ने भी औरंगजेब को लेकर के एक hesitation क्यों रहा है उनके अंदर. So these are my interventions.
That is a very sad part I feel with the later historian, that they still carry on with this colonial assumption and never try to challenge it or deny. Although there were some attempts, like Thoroughly has written a very fantastic book about Mughal Empire, but still somehow they failed, not really done as much it was supposed to be, or somehow I think to some extent their own association with their some school, like this whole group Irfan Habib, and they were associated with Marxist group, and they particularly were concerned more about economic policy, economic aspect of the outcome of policies of or result policies of Aurangzeb. So they never tried to challenge the religious interpretation of Aurangzeb's reign. They largely concerned with the zamindari aspect of his reign, or like that. Okay. Apart from that, as far as binary concerned, so I'm very clear about the binary, that the binary Akbar versus Aurangzeb was created during the reign of during the period of British period. But Dara versus Aurangzeb binary के लिए कहीं ना कहीं somehow Aurangzeb is also responsible. When he was challenging the throne claim of the Dara, somehow he portrayed his Aurangzeb and his group portrayed Dara as a very heterodox kind of person, and they somehow claim that we are very Islamic, although none of them were as Islamic as they were. Like Aurangzeb, his own army was made of Hindu and Muslim soldiers. और सबसे बड़ा इसमें खराबी ये भी है कि इस पूरे बैटल वॉर ऑफ सक्सेशन को बिटवीन दारा और शिको और औरंगजेब को एक हिंदू मुस्लिम वॉर की तरह दिखाया जाता है. ऐसा नहीं है. और दारा शिको की साइड भी मुस्लिम भी थे, हिंदू भी थे, और औरंगजेब की साइड भी हिंदू और मुस्लिम दोनों ही इक्वली लड़ रहे थे और सेम फिगर के साथ लड़ रहे थे. इनफैक्ट जब दारा अगर ये इतनी ऐसी वॉर हिंदू मुस्लिम की तरह वॉर होती, तो बाद में औरंगजेब जय सिंह और जसवंत इस तरह के नॉवेल्स को कभी सपोर्ट नहीं करते या उन्हें इस तरह की इतनी बड़ी पोस्ट पे नहीं बनाते. ठीक है. एनीवे, तो ये दारा, एज फार एज दारा एंड औरंगजेब बाइनरीज कंसर्न, देन औरंगजेब शुड बी ब्लेम्ड हिमसेल्फ. ओके. एंड लेटर ऑन दिस बाइनरीज वर adopted and carried on by Britisher and Indian scholars. So ये है. And there was first question you were asking. अच्छा बाइनरी. अच्छा ठीक. एक्चुअली इट इज़ अ वेरी क्लेवर टूल आई थिंक. जब भी हम किसी को अच्छा बुरा दिखाना चाहते हैं, तो मैंने once I argued this in my present class. Okay.
The problem of making binaries, is there in the Western thought. This is my opinion. I'm not saying that it should be accepted by each and everybody. But I have seen this, the problem binaries so many times. This is good. This is
हाँ, Orientalism or Orientalist and Occidental and this kind of thing. White and black. Exactly. No, it is there, but still. I think it is a very human nature to, when आप जब जस्टिफाई करने चाहते हैं अपने आप को अच्छा, तो आप कंपेयर करते हैं. ठीक है. आप कंपेयर करते हैं एक को दूसरे के साथ. सेम वे औरंगजेब को कंपेयर करा गया डिफरेंट रूलर को, ताकि उसे गलत दिखाया जा सके, यहाँ पर उसे गलत प्रेजेंट करा गया. और सेम ये बाइनरी कंसिस्टेंट नहीं है, यूनिफॉर्म नहीं है. हर रूलर हर मोमेंट पे चेंज हो रही है, क्योंकि आप एक कंसिस्टेंट बाइनरी पे आप उससे गलत नहीं प्रूव कर सकते मल्टीपल टाइम्स. लाइक आप अगर जिस वैल्यू पे और अकबर के साथ आप उसे कंपेयर कर रहे हैं, अकबर और दारा शाह सेकुलरिज्म वैल्यू पे, तो वो शिवाजी पे जब आप अप्लाई करेंगे तो अप्लाई नहीं होती. सबको पता है कि शिवाजी वाज फाइटिंग फॉर हिज रिलीजन, है ना, इसी वजह से हीरो माना जाता है उसे. तो सेम बाइनरी अप्लाई नहीं. सेम चीज शाहजहां के साथ है. शाहजहां वाज द फर्स्ट रूलर हु रिवाइव्ड इस्लामिक स्पिरिट इन मुगल एम्पायर, है ना, नॉट औरंगजेब. सो अब शाहजहाँ और औरंगजेब में इस तरह कंपेरिजन ही नहीं है, तो ये बाइनरी वहाँ मैटर नहीं करता। तो इसमें क्या, अब शाहजहाँ और औरंगजेब को किस तरह कंपेयर करना है कि उसका आर्किटेक्चर और उसमें कंपेयर करा जाता है, ठीक है। तो बाइनरी खुद करिए वो, मतलब ये खुद चेंज हो रही है विथ हाँ, विथ पर्सन और विथ मोटिव्स, ठीक है। तो ये एक क्लेवर टूल है, सब जगह अप्लाई करते हैं, और आई एम नॉट श्योर कि वेदर फ्रॉम इट ओरिजिनेट्स।
We have one more. This is the last question because we would like to wind up the work.
Okay.
I have question regarding last question.
Sure.
एक सवाल इसमें ये निकल कर आता है कि क्या हम लोग जो है आज के जो मॉडर्न आइडियाज़ हैं, सेकुलरिज्म, नेशनलिज्म, कम्युनलिज्म, इन सब को इम्पोज किए बिना हिस्ट्री का मूल्यांकन कर सकते हैं, एवेल्युएट कर सकते हैं क्या उसको? मतलब मोस्टली हम देखते हैं कि आज जो हिस्ट्री का इंटरप्रिटेशन किया जाता है वो दो ही तरह के लोग करते हैं, दो तरह के हिस्ट्रियंस करते हैं। तो वो हैं जो कहीं ना कहीं हम सेकुलर लॉ भी मान सकते हैं, लेफ्ट लॉ भी मान सकते हैं। एक वो हिस्ट्रियंस हैं जो नेशनलिस्ट हिस्ट्रियंस हैं, जिन्होंने कहीं ना कहीं ब्रिटिश के बाद लिखना शुरू किया और उसके बाद। तो ये सवाल था मेरा।
अच्छा, ठीक है। इसका जवाब इसमें ये है कि कर भी सकते हैं और नहीं भी। तो कर इस सेंस में सकते हैं कि उसके लिए ये है कि हमें पहले हर जो उस पर जो आइडियाज़ है पहले समझना पड़ेगा, अभी जो मॉडर्न आइडियाज़ हैं उन्हें, और उससे फिर मिडिवल सोसाइटी को उस सेंस में लेना पड़ेगा, ना कि हम उस आइडियाज़ को इम्पोज करें, ठीक है। हम उसमें ये नहीं देखें कि ये सेकुलर आज की वैल्यूज़ है क्या है, ठीक, आज की वैल्यूज़ के हिसाब से कि क्या थे वो, क्या उनका रिलीजियस बिलीफ क्या था, ठीक है, उनके, ठीक, उसे एज अ सिंपल रूलर देखें, उसके उन्होंने क्या करा, कैसे करा, ठीक है, और उससे ठीक रेस्पेक्ट। लेकिन उसमें कर क्यों नहीं सकते, इसका एक इशू है कि वी आर द प्रोडक्ट ऑफ सोसाइटी और टाइम्स, है ना। तो हम जिस टाइम में हैं उस टाइम में इसी तरह के आइडियाज़ हैं, और हम इस आइडियाज़ से अलग हट के नॉर्मली नहीं सोच सकते। तो हम जब उसे पढ़ेंगे हिस्ट्री को, तो सम हाउ यानी हम उसमें ये चीज़ें, ये वैल्यूज ढूंढेंगे ही ढूंढेंगे, ठीक है। कि वो आज के, फॉर एग्जांपल आज के ज़माने में एक अच्छा रूलर, एक अच्छा बेटा होने की पहचान क्या है? कि बाप के खिलाफ बात ना करे, ठीक है, अच्छा इंसान होने की, बाप की इज्जत करे, ठीक है। लेकिन मिडिवल वैल्यूज़ क्या है कि वहाँ पे सारे रूलर बाप के खिलाफ रिबेल कर रहे हैं उनके लिए, ठीक है। तो अब अगर हम इस बेस पे, हम अब मिडिल टाइम में हमें कोई अच्छा रूलर देखना हो, अच्छा इंसान देखना हो, तो हम कैसे देखेंगे? हम तो ये देखेंगे ना कि बाप के रिस्पेक्ट नहीं कर रहा था वो, ठीक है। तो हम वी आर द बाई प्रोडक्ट ऑफ आवर टाइम, और इससे हम बच नहीं सकते। तो कुछ हद तक अवॉइड करा जा सकता है, बट टोटली नहीं बचा जा सकता इससे, ठीक है।
I think we would now we will end the session over here. So with this, I would like to extend my thankful gratitude to all of you who all came after chalking out the time from the busy schedule. And with this, as I would like to invite Afle, who is our Delhi University Fraternity Unit Movement President. I would like to call him on the dais and present a memento to Dr. Azhar Mallick.